BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Tom Sanders. Good evening. The Commons Speaker, John Bercow, has ruled out giving MPs an immediate vote on Boris Johnson's new Brexit deal, as the Prime Minister had wanted. Downing Street said Mr Bercow was preventing the government from delivering on the will of the people. Northern Ireland's Assembly has sat for the first time in more than 2.5 years as part of a failed attempt to block changes to the abortion law. Anti-corruption protests in Lebanon have pushed the government into announcing emergency reforms. Royal sources say Prince William has expressed concern that Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle are in a fragile place. A study has concluded that former professional football players are more likely to die of dementia than the general population. Scientists say a new way of editing DNA could correct almost 90% of the genetic errors that cause disease. The Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, has blocked an attempt by the government to have another meaningful vote on Boris Johnson's Brexit deal this evening. With just 10 days left until the UK is due to leave the European Union, the Prime Minister was hoping to win approval for the agreement to allow Brexit to go ahead as scheduled. But Mr Bercow told the Commons that the issue had already been brought before MPs on Saturday and it would be repetitive and disorderly to debate it again. His decision followed parliamentary convention but angered Brexiteers. Downing Street said it was disappointed but would now introduce the legislation needed for the withdrawal agreement. Our assistant political editor Norman Smith reports.
The Speaker's decision to rebuff Boris Johnson's attempt to have a second go at his meaningful vote may not have been a surprise, but it nevertheless prompted fury within government. Number 10 accused the Speaker of denying Parliament a chance to deliver on the will of the people. The ruling also led to a series of personal attacks on the Speaker from Tory MPs angry at what they perceived as his bias against the government. In a lengthy and combative response, Mr Bercow insisted holding a vote on the same motion as that debated on Saturday would flout Commons rules. There had also, he said, been no change in the circumstances since the first vote. And Mr Bercow chided the government for failing to show proper respect for decisions taken by the Commons.
In summary, today's motion is in substance the same as Saturday's motion, and the House has decided the matter. Today's circumstances are in substance the same as Saturday's circumstances. My ruling is therefore that the motion will not be debated today, as it would be repetitive and disorderly to do so.
His ruling prompted a barrage of complaints from aggrieved Tory Brexiteers, among them the Conservative chairman of the Public Administration Committee, Sir Bernard Jenkin, who said he would be holding an inquiry into the role of the Speaker.
I note the dilemmas you face mean that on occasion you will sometimes have to please some and not others, but it is becoming remarkable how often you please one lot and not the other lot.
Thwarted from holding a second meaningful vote, the government tonight announced it would begin the process tomorrow of trying to push the legislation to implement Mr Johnson's deal through Parliament by the end of the week in order to meet his deadline of October the 31st, a timetable already dismissed as unacceptable by many MPs, particularly since the legislation is certain to face a blizzard of amendments, an argument dismissed by the Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay.
After more than 1,200 days since the referendum, the one thing I don't think this House has lacked is opportunity to debate the issues contained in the withdrawal agreement bill. And the withdrawal bill will be published, it is with the House, in order for that debate to happen.
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, meanwhile, questioned why the Prime Minister had failed to appear before MPs.
The Prime Minister has not deigned to grace us with his presence today, but I'm reassured, Mr Speaker, that despite his pledge, he's not to be found anywhere in a ditch.
Ministers remain confident they do now have the support to get their Brexit bill through the Commons and believe they're poised to win the symbolic second reading vote tomorrow. However, with the numbers so tight and the DUP still bitterly opposed, the eventual outcome in the Commons is almost impossible to predict.
The government's withdrawal agreement bill, due to be published tonight, will set out how the Brexit deal agreed between Boris Johnson and the EU will actually be implemented. It would, if passed by both houses of Parliament, turn what is a draft international treaty into UK law and would give the government permission to ratify it. Our reality check correspondent Chris Morris has this assessment of some of the details in the bill which are likely to prove particularly controversial.
Bills to implement major European treaties usually take several weeks to go through Parliament and sometimes longer. And of course this government has no majority in the House of Commons. So it will have to navigate a series of votes with no time for any delay. And among the amendments that its opponents are ready to propose are, for example, a requirement to hold another referendum and an instruction to try to keep the UK in a customs union with the EU in the future. The bill also has to delve in detail into some controversial areas: how the UK will make payments to the EU as part of its Brexit financial settlement, how the new protocol on Ireland, setting up a de facto border for customs and regulations between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, will work in practice, and how the European Court of Justice will continue to play a more limited role in the UK after Brexit. These are sensitive issues which can be fudged a bit in political communications. In legislation, they have to be set down in black and white and in precise legal language for all to see.
Scotland's highest court has delayed a decision on whether the unsigned letter sent by Boris Johnson to the EU asking for a Brexit extension complies with the law. Mr Johnson sent the letter to Brussels along with another signed one, saying he believed a further delay would be a mistake. If and when the UK does leave the EU in the coming weeks, it will just mark the start of a long and detailed negotiation on their future trading relationship. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports.
Fatigue with Brexit runs deep, in Parliament and beyond. The government is imploring MPs to get it done and let the country move on. But even if the UK leaves the EU with a deal, Brexit will not be done. A standstill transition period will begin, during which little actually changes. The UK will still follow most EU rules, but have no say in how they're made. This is when trade talks will start for the first time, aimed at securing an agreement that will leave the UK and EU further apart than they are now. How far apart and the trade-offs involved are questions likely to dominate the election campaign that's coming round the corner. The transition period will expire in December 2020, but could be extended for another 2 years if